Hello, students. Um, let's take a look at the directory for Booleans because uh, you might have noticed something that you thought was a little bit strange. I could have also done directory true or directory false because it knows those things are Booleans and the same options would come up. And the one thing you might notice here is we got this add, and you might be thinking, what could it mean to add Booleans? What could we mean by that? Let's try adding them. So let's try true plus true, and I get 2. So what's up with that? Well, it turns out that in Python, true evaluates as 1 if we treat it like a number, and false evaluates as 0. Now you do not want to abuse this too much because it can create some confusing code if you're trying to replace your ones with trues and stuff like that just to make it trickier for other people to read. Maybe not such a good idea. Um, but it is true that if, let's say, just to do another example, if I do false plus false, I should get 0. And if I do false plus true, I should get 1. So maybe not something that you're going to need all the time. But one other thing is that 0 also, so not only does true evaluate as 1 and false evaluates as 0, but 0 evaluates as false and 1 evaluates as true. So for instance, if I were to go not 0, since 0 is false, I should get true, which I do. And if I go not 1, since 1 is true, I get false. But what about the other numbers? What if I try to treat them like a bool? Well, if I do not of any number that's not 0, I'm going to get false because all of these other numbers evaluate as true. Every integer evaluates as true except for 0. Now, I really discouraged you guys from doing your arithmetic with true or false, but going in this other direction, I'm not going to discourage you quite as much because there's going to be certain times when you might want something to stop happening when something hits 0, and you can use the fact that 0 evaluates as false in order to make that happen. I won't say anything more about that because we're not getting into flow control just yet, but it's something to keep in mind that 0 evaluates as false and every other number evaluates as true. And it doesn't matter whether it's the float 0 either, let's say. You'll get the same thing whether you use the floats. As a matter of fact, since we're on floats, let's go back to floats. So let's try the directory from 0.0 and let's look down. Let's look at one of these types of methods. So this is a little strange here. It's kind of long as integer ratio. So what could I mean by that? Well, first of all, let's talk about how to use this. This doesn't work quite the way the built-in functions we've looked at so far do. This works a little differently. Let's try a float. And let me ask for it as integer ratio. And what this does is it tries to express it as a ratio of 2 integers. So what do I get? I get a 1 and a 2. Oh, well, that makes sense, but what is this strange thing in parentheses with a comma? Well, this is something, actually, let's pretend we don't know what it is. Let's try to figure it out. So what is this 1 comma 2 business? This is a tuple. So a tuple is a bunch of things that are clumped together. So it's basically I've taken a 1 and a 2, which are 2 different integers, and I put them together into one object. And you can do this. You can do this with a 1, 3. We could even do it with things that are not of the same type, 2.0 and a false. So I've clumped all of these things together. And if I ask what the type is of this, it's a tuple. So a tuple is basically you clump different things together into a single object. Okay. Before I talk more about tuples, let's just stick to this as integer ratio. This is very nice. It knows that we have this float, and we can express it as a ratio of integers. So maybe floats aren't so bad. You might think, well, you got to be really careful with floats because as soon as you think they're behaving, you get something weird. So 1 over 5 as an integer ratio, you'd expect, hey, I get 1 over 5. And instead, I get this kind of stuff because of the way 0.2 ends up being stored in Python. So you really, I mean, it's close to the same thing as 1 over 5 because 1 over 5 will evaluate as 0.2. And this is going to be close enough to evaluate as the float 0.2. But as you know, with a 7 and a 4, this is not going to be exactly a 0.2 over there. Okay. So that's all I'll say about that, is to one more time be extra careful of floats. Okay, so tuples. We know what a tuple is. It's things clumped together. We can do a type for a tuple. There's a type. But we could also run a directory on tuple. I could either write the word tuple or I could put a tuple in there in order to get this list of things that we can do to tuples. And there's many things that we can do to tuples, but I guess I want to talk about two of them really quick. Contains tells us whether something is in the tuple. And what do I mean by that? I mean whether it's one of the things in the tuple. For instance, I could ask, is 3 in the tuple 4, 5, 6? And it's not one of the elements in the tuple, so I'd hope that that returns false. It does. I could ask, is 5 in the tuple 4, 5, 6? And it returns true. So that's what in does. It's a new keyword for us. And let's talk about indexing. So what the index of a tuple will do is, let's say I want to grab one of the elements in a tuple. Like let's say I have 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. And I want to grab the third element. Okay. Well, Python starts counting everything at 0. So the very first element will always be 0. The second one will be the first. So this is the 0th element, the first element, the second element, the third element, and the fourth element. And that's why my lessons start at 0 as well. But okay, let's say I want to go for the middle element. That would be 0, 1, 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little subscript notation with the square brackets, and I'm going to ask for the second thing in this tuple, which is 0, 1, 2, really the third if I start counting at 1, and I get my 5. And I could also do something like this. Let's say I have true, false, 1, false, 3.5 as a tuple. Oh, I wanted to do something more with that. So let me just grab that again, and I'm going to say, give me the 0th element there, and that gives me the 0th element in the count for that tuple. So now we've learned a little bit about tuples as well. Think about it as just different things that we've just sort of grouped together with parentheses and commas into a single object that we can do things to, like check to see if something's in it, or we can grab elements by their index using this sort of subscript notation. And that's what I wanted to talk about here.